You know, it's funny how we can look at a country like Canada, you know, stable, prosperous on the surface, but still get the sense that something's not quite right. And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting.
Yeah.
We're digging into Decadencia Economica de Canada.txt, right? Because you picked up on this intriguing contradiction. Canada's economy, it's humming along, but is it really on the brink of decadence, like the source claims?
Right.
We're going to unpack that, right? What's the reality behind these headlines? Is Canada's economic engine truly sputtering out?
Well, it's interesting, when you compare the conversation around Canada to, say, the U.S. economy post-pandemic. U.S., we saw this quick rebound.
Yeah.
But Canada, growth was already slowing, and it seems like they've really hit a wall.
It's like this image of a well-oiled machine, right?
Yeah.
And then suddenly you start to hear these, like, grinding gears.
Exactly.
And the source really hones in on this idea of wealth, not just growth.
Right.
So it's not just is the economy growing, but are Canadians actually getting wealthier?
Yeah, and that's where this idea, this metric of per capita GDP becomes really crucial to understand.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about the size of the whole pie, right?
Yep.
The whole economy.
Right.
It's about how big of a slice each person gets.
Right.
And for you listening, that's the difference between actually feeling the benefits of that economic growth, having more money in your pocket, versus looking around and wondering, well, where'd it all go?
Yeah.
Who's benefiting here?
Exactly. And here's where I think the source throws us a real curveball. In 2023, Canada's real GDP per capita, adjusted for inflation, it actually shrank.
Wow.
Almost 2%. So if that becomes a trend,
right,
it's not just stagnation anymore, it's a decline in actual living standards.
It's a huge warning sign.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you can't talk about this without talking about immigration.
Right.
Because Canada has welcomed a large number of newcomers.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a big part of their policy.
But it's crucial to understand that immigration on its own doesn't dictate what happens with the economy.
Exactly. It's not as simple as saying more people, more problems, or more people, more prosperity.
Exactly.
It's way more nuanced than that.
And the source even points to places like Singapore, Hong Kong.
Right.
Both have high immigration.
Right.
And they have robust per capita GDP growth. They've managed to kind of avoid this decadence word that the source uses.
Right.
So if it's not just about the number of people, what's going on beneath the surface?
Right. That's the million-dollar question. It's like
it is kind of like what they're talking about in the source, this investment iceberg, right?
Oh, yeah.
On the surface, maybe things don't look so bad, but then underneath.
Exactly. And that's where we might find a big part of the explanation. Because long-term, consistent economic health, it really relies on investment.
Right.
Domestic investment from within Canada, obviously, but also foreign investment coming in from outside.
Of course, yeah.
That's what builds new factories, funds that cutting-edge technology, creates those high-paying jobs that I think we all want to see.
Absolutely, yeah. Those are jobs everyone wants, right?
Yeah. And here's the thing, and this is something that really jumped out at me from the source. Since the year 2000, Canada's share of global foreign investment, it's plummeted.
Yeah.
So what's going on? Why are domestic and international investors shying away from Canada?
Well, to put it bluntly, I think Canada has kind of developed a reputation for being a tough place to do business.
Really?
And the source calls it this snowdrift of regulations, and they highlight a couple of things, like the time it takes to get permits approved, right? For new projects, for building anything, it can be way longer in Canada than in other developed countries.
Oh, wow.
And then there's the tax code.
Yeah.
It's so complex. It's a burden on businesses that are already there, and it's a deterrent to new ones coming in.
Right. It's like death by 1,000 cuts.
Exactly. If you're trying to grow, if you're trying to innovate,
Yeah.
it just seems like it's working against them.
Yeah.
And it's not even just international investors, right?
Right.
The source actually found that Canadian businesses themselves, they are among the least likely to reinvest in their own economy.
Which is fascinating when you think about it.
Right.
Because that points to a lack of confidence, right?
Right.
If businesses, especially your own businesses, don't see a clear path to being profitable, whether because of the regulations, because they just don't see the opportunities, they're not going to take those risks.
So it's like this vicious cycle.
Totally.
Less investment leads to fewer opportunities, which leads to even less investment.
Exactly. A downward spiral.
Okay, so we've talked about investment, or lack thereof, But what about the industries that are booming everywhere else? Is Canada being left behind?
Yeah, and the source uses this term deindustrialization,
Yeah.
which sounds very jargony.
Yeah.
But it basically means the shrinking of Canada's manufacturing sector, as part of the overall economy.
Okay.
And while that's happening globally to some extent, Canada's got these strict labor laws, the high minimum wage, and while those are designed to protect workers,
Right.
they can also make it more expensive to do business in those industries.
So it's like this trade-off, right?
Exactly.
You're trying to protect people, but you're also potentially hurting them in other ways.
You got it.
And then there are the regulations that just, I don't know, they almost seem counterproductive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that dairy and poultry supply management system.
Yeah.
That always comes up.
And it's a perfect example of policies, even with good intentions, having these ripple effects that maybe they didn't anticipate.
Right.
So it protects those producers, but it also means higher prices for consumers. And it makes it almost impossible for a new business to even enter that market.
Right.
So you don't have that competition that drives innovation and growth over the long term.
Yeah. It's like building a wall around a garden.
Right.
You might be protecting a few plants, but the whole ecosystem is going to suffer.
A really good way to put it.
This brain drain idea really stood out to me in the source, It feels like we're losing our most talented people to the very places Canada needs to compete with.
It's a serious concern. The wage gap between Canada and the U.S., particularly in fields like tech and healthcare, is a major factor. The source cites data showing that the average salary for a software engineer in San Francisco is significantly higher than in Toronto, for example. And it's not just about the money, career advancement opportunities, and the perception of a more dynamic work environment also play a role.
And the source actually put some numbers on this, right?
It does. Last year, for every American who moved to Canada, over 120 Canadians moved to the U.S. Now, that doesn't mean everyone is leaving for a job, of course, but it does highlight the magnetic pull of those opportunities south of the border.
It feels like we're at a crossroads. We've uncovered this productivity slump, a lack of investment, and now this brain drain. So is there any good news? Can Canada turn this ship around?
It's not a lost cause, not at all. Canada has a lot of strengths. A highly educated workforce, a strong social safety net, and a stable political system are all attractive to individuals and businesses alike. The key is to leverage these strengths while addressing the challenges we've discussed.
So, like any good recipe, it's about adjusting the ingredients, right?
Precisely. The source hints at some potential solutions. Cutting red tape to make it easier to start and run a business. Streamlining regulations to create a more predictable and business-friendly environment. And crucially, fostering a culture of innovation that encourages risk-taking and rewards success.
That makes sense. If you were advising a policymaker, if you could only pick one priority to really jumpstart investment and innovation, what would it be?
That's a tough one. But if I had to choose, it would be to simplify the regulatory landscape, create clear, consistent rules that don't constantly shift. This would send a strong signal to both domestic and foreign investors that Canada is serious about attracting investment and fostering a competitive business environment.
It's about confidence, isn't it? Showing the world and Canadians themselves that Canada is ready to compete on a global scale. So there you have it. We've really dug deep into this decadence question, haven't we? We've explored the factors dragging down productivity, the chilling effect on investment, and the brain drain that's robbing Canada of its talent. What's clear is that this isn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. This is about the future of Canada and its people. If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, we encourage you to check out Decadencia Economica to Canada.txt for yourself. Read it with a critical eye, consider the questions we've raised, and form your own conclusions. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those deep dives going.